Okay, so we are continuing our discussion of Adam and Eve, which may go on for a while because I'm finding more articles. And Jim, why don't you restate your question for the record?
Oh, I'm sure this has come up with you before, but
Yes,
God said to Adam and Eve, to Adam, on the day you eat of it, surely you will die.
yes.
But God obviously knew that Adam and Eve had no concept of dying or death or what that would be.
Okay, so I would I would not agree with the way you phrased it. What I would say is it is reasonable to ask the question whether Adam and Eve had a concept of death. You
Okay.
stated that it's obvious that God knew that they didn't. I don't think it's obvious at all. For one thing, neither Adam nor Eve raised the question, what do you mean die? Because and
That's
that
true.
would make it obvious.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I think you're asking a reasonable question, and it's one that we can dig into, and look at and examine the question of whether Adam and Eve knew what God meant. Because obviously Adam then tells Eve, and even the serpent says you won't die. So people are discussing death, and and the fact that they're just discussing it, I would say, would indicate that they knew what they were talking about. Because no one raises the question. God said we're going to die, but I have no idea what God meant by that. So, I mean, I'm sort of quibbling with your point that it's obvious, but you
Oh,
certainly can raise the question: did they know what was meant by death? And of course, I don't take the story literally. So I take it as an allegory. In fact, I've found one or two more articles which are interesting. I suppose I'll wait till people start throwing apples at me uh, before I stop. Um, but but and one of the ones, it's not the one we're going to read tonight, and it's not the one I'm going to put on in the email tonight. But one of the authors said it's clear that there were other people around, that Adam and Eve weren't the first two people in the world. Why is it clear? Because when Cain murders Abel, he's afraid of other people harassing him, and God puts a protection on him. And also, he finds a wife. So the question is, where in the world did she come from? So again, it just depends how you read the story, how carefully you read the story. It's an open question, and anybody knows, that when we discuss biblical texts as Jews, I think also as Catholics, um, that we dig in and we ask questions of the text. And I think your question is a very reasonable one, but it doesn't seem to be the one. The Bible doesn't seem to be interested in that question. I often say a long time ago when people raise the question, Cain murders Abel, and then the text says, and he knew his wife, and they start having children, and so on. And very famously, I think Spencer Tracy in the movie Inherit the Wind. I don't know if you remember that one about the
yeah.
Scopes monkey trial.
Yes,
He asked the question, where did she come from?
yes.
And my very simple-minded answer to that question is the Bible isn't interested in that question. It just it just goes on and assumes she came from somewhere. So if you are questioning in depth the historicity of the story, there's all kinds of issues. But if you're reading it as sort of an allegory teaching lessons, then while I still think it's appropriate to raise those issues, clearly the Bible is not terribly interested in those issues. And that, I can't give you a better answer than that.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
because if God obviously knew that, why would God put it that way? I'll see your divine assertion and raise you one. So if God knew that Adam and Eve wouldn't have any idea what is meant by death, it why would God say that? Why wouldn't God say something more forceful? They you could argue Adam thought it was just going to give him a bad case of poison ivy. I mean, he had no idea what death was. So anyway, but it is a reasonable, it's a reasonable question. I hope that's helpful. Um, I am fascinated with the Adam and Eve story for many reasons. One, it's a story with which we are all generally familiar. It is also a story that is foundational in Christianity. And because it's so foundational in Christianity, it's part of our culture. Um, and so that's why I love studying it and I love digging into it. And I actually have a couple of articles and I'm finding more, which I think are all written by biblical scholars. I don't think any of them are Jewish, uh, but they're scholars in the. I'll give you one more tantalizing one. It's an article that I just read, a little while ago. It says God commanded the man, saying, don't eat of the fruit, of the tree of good and evil. And the Hebrew comes from the same root as the word for mitzvah, commandment. But this author is pointing out that no, that in the J text, if you know what I mean by that, that word is used as an advice, not a commandment. And what he also said, and this was brand new for me, he said, nowhere in the Torah are there any legal commandments in J text. This is it's sort of revolutionary for me to think about it in this way. I mean, there's E text and P text. Does everybody know what I mean by um, Sandra? I don't. You haven't been.
Yeah, I know I studied this at some point, but it's a right, it's a certain like a certain author that was
So
of the
there's
Torah.
something called the documentary hypothesis,
Yeah.
and Richard Elliott Friedman is the scholar of that idea, and basically it traces for many reasons the idea that there seems to be at least four different authors of the Torah, or you could say four different writers of the Torah, and it has to do with sometimes with the way they spell words. But for example, in the opening chapter of Genesis, the deity is always referred to as Adonai Elohim. No, I'm sorry, as Elohim. You don't see the word Adonai, the four-letter name of God. And that's actually, for various reasons, that's attributed to P text, priestly author. But in the J text, God is generally referred to as Yud He Vav He. And it's J because in German, if we were trying to say the forbidden word Yahweh, you spell the word Yah in German J-A. The word Yah, which means yes, in German is spelled J-A. So it's called J text. So anyway, so there's interesting insights about that. And actually that fits more in my understanding of this text, that it wasn't a hard, rigid commandment, but more of an instruction or advice. And then you can ask, what was the point of the instruction? And maybe not the article we'll read tonight, but one we'll read in coming weeks. We'll get into that because I love studying this, and if it gets to be too boring, let me know because otherwise I might just continue with it. So, any other thoughts? Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I have one thought. I'm assuming this is my assumption now that the Torah was written by more than one person. It could have been a couple of people that were writing it at a certain time of their life. As I read through the Torah, I find some very beautiful writing. I mean, it's exquisite. And how do the people writing it come up with that exquisite idea, those exquisite ideas? Where do they come from? And I don't understand. I mean, I'm reading somebody else's words or words from God. I can understand where God's words came from, but what about the humans that were writing this? Where did their
So,
words come up from?
so, so this depends on your theology of Torah. So, from an Orthodox perspective, God wrote the Torah and dictated it to Moses with the instruction, write it down, and
Right,
that's where it comes from.
right.
And again, I would say in the Hebrew, it's more exquisite than in translation. Um, there are things we see in the Hebrew that we just miss in translation, no matter what the
Oh,
translation is.
right.
Um, so so then, if you assume so that would be orthodox.
Right.
I would say a more liberal interpretation, which I would characterize as reform,
Form,
and
yes.
I'll just talk about my own thought on this,
Okay.
is that something happened at Sinai. God communicated with the Israelites, and the record of that communication, which became our foundational myths and legends, were written down, and they were written down by different groups. So
Yes.
you had groups in the country, Israel splits into northern tribes and southern tribes. So you have the writings that were in the northern tribes, and scholars would say that became the E-text. And then there were writings that were in the southern tribes, and that's what became the J-text. And then there was a priestly, the priests were, looking out for job security, so they wrote texts that dealt with what what the priesthood is all about and things that priests can only do and normal folks can't do, and that became the P text. So what I would say, in the spirit of non-orthodoxy, is these are our foundational stories,
Yes.
and they are carefully put together. They're not haphazard. I mean, it's as you say, it's beautiful in translation and fascinating in translation, and there's and in the original Hebrew you can see structures that you just don't see
Right.
in translation. There's also some crazy stuff in the biblical text, that you're put to death for violating the Sabbath. We were just reading about that actually on Saturday with Rabbi Diamond's section. We were reading in Numbers. So that there's stuff that's hard to reconcile. So I would say not
Yeah.
all of it is edifying, but but
Yes.
but but
Yes.
yeah, I mean the text is, I often say I got lots of books behind me, and those are all the Jewish ones. There's some science books over on the other side, and I have physics books, and they're obsolete in 5 years.
Really. Yeah.
Okay. The Torah, scholars would say the text that we have is at least 2,500 years old, and we're
Wow.
still studying it, word by word. It is many things, but no one would say, I would never say obsolete. So
Because I
anyway,
think
yeah,
when I'm reading Torah, I think the ideas come from my heart, not from my brain, but from my heart. And that's what I'm picturing as people are writing this down in the Torah, that they're writing from their heart, not from their mind.
yeah.
And that's
So
what I
I would
wonder.
say it's way too carefully structured not to have been written from their mind. And the other thing, as a scientist, when you say words are coming from your heart, you're really
Yes,
saying they're coming from an emotional place.
yes, they are.
But I would say, as a scientist, that's in your brain. It's not in your heart. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
that could be.
And then
That could be.
also, it's also interesting that the ancients saw the heart as the seat of intelligence. So when it
Yes,
says love God with all your heart, it means with your brain.
your brain, right.
But
That's what I
okay,
would
but
think.
but let's go on. Faras.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
How many different literature are in the Torah? Because if it's written by one person, should be everything the same way that one person write it. But now we have different writing, different
Yeah.
literature. How
So I
many
would say,
different?
so in the first five books of the Bible, which is the Torah, I'm now not talking about the entire Bible. I'm just talking about the Torah. As
Yes,
I say, the standard documentary hypothesis is four authors, J,
for
E, P,
others.
and D. D is the Deuteronomist. And then as you study it more and more, you can find a holiness code, which may have a separate author. Sometimes they call that H. And there's a redactor, which sort of pulls things together, transition paragraphs. So I would say there's traces of at least six authors or more, or I'll say six scribes, because you can still argue that God is the author, but God communicates to us and we write stuff down.
Right, right.
So I would not say that the copy of the Torah that we have is the literal word of God. But I will point out that Orthodox Orthodox teachers, and certainly Chabad and others, would say that no, the Torah that we have is literally the word of God.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I've
Right.
understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, any other thoughts, or we'll dive into another article? Let's go to screen share.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's a wonderful source called the Torah.com, and there's lots of good articles about it. This one called "Becoming Homo Erectus," which means man who
Yeah,
stands up
that's the one I
rather
have.
than crawling around on the ground. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And as you will see, I figured out a way of popping up footnotes because I love to read all the footnotes. Okay, I'll read the introduction. Joanne, are you up to reading tonight? Okay,
Yes,
good.
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at creation, humans and animals were alike, plant eating, unclothed, and speaking the same language. God even brings the beasts to Adam to find a fitting companion. Everything changes when Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What kind of story is this? Remarkable parallels with the Mesopotamian Gilgamesh epic show how the biblical author crafted an Israelite wisdom story about the end of humankind's infancy. And we will read this part about Gilgamesh. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Gilgamesh is I think it's contemporaneously written with these stories. And as you'll see, there are a lot of parallels. And a professor by Carol van der Doorn, which doesn't sound Jewish to me. And there's a nice picture from the Prado of Adam and all the animals. Okay, so there's Adam and all the animals. Um, and I pointed out, if nothing else, just to be alarming and outrageous, a rabbinic idea that said that when basically the text says God brought all these animals to Adam for two reasons. First, to name them. So naming seems to have a significance in our tradition. And we have the ineffable name of God, and names have a lot of significance. I mean, the Adam is created from the Adamah. Adamah is earth. So you could say the word Adam is like earthling. And Chava, his wife, is created from is related to the word chai, which means living, and even the biblical text says she was called that because she's the mother of all living things, living people, I guess. So naming is important. There's Adam naming the animals, and it's also interesting that although the animals seem to be in pairs, because each animal was originally created with its mate, in the story in the Garden of Eden, first you have Adam alone, and God parades the animals before him to see if he can find a suitable Ezer Kenegdo, namely a suitable mate, which other rabbis have said they wanted to see if Adam would be satisfied with bestiality, or thank you, Jim, for your raised eyebrows and dropped jaw, and also it's another statement that God is leaving up to us who our mates should be, which has implications for same gender marriage and things like that. But that's not part of this story. So
If you look at the painting,
yeah,
this is Adam up here.
yes,
Look at his eyes. His
he's
eyes are haunting. They're
he's
like
looking around.
he's looking around and
Yep,
he's wondering where is somebody I can be with?
right. Where is my Ezer Kenegdo?
Yes, and
The help who will be a partner for me in opposition.
yes.
Yes, he's looking, and he's not finding, so it's going to take some surgery, which we
Okay.
As
talked about.
another thing that it shows that he closed his sexual place. I don't know.
I'm sorry?
He closed the penis, but on that time,
Oh, yeah, but I think
everybody
that's
used to,
Francisco Barasno.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't think the story makes it clear that Adam doesn't notice that he's naked. Adam and Eve don't notice that they're naked until they eat the fruit. But I
So,
think, the painter here, to get his work sold, uh, wanted to be a little more cautious about that. So yeah, there seems to be some leaves there. Good eye. Okay. So, Joanne.
The book of Genesis is about the Israelite patriarchs, but the first 11 chapters deal with the origins of the world and what transpired in primeval times, with two stories about the creation of the human species. The first creation story is tersely worded and has God creating the first couple of humans as the finishing touch of his work, after he had created the earth and all of the plants and animals in it. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
So now, actually, I've solved the problem of not having to scroll all the way down. If I just hover my cursor over the footnote, you can see this is basically using a standard translation, and that's a pretty good translation. So in the first story, in chapter 1 of Genesis, on the sixth day, after everything else was created, namely, the heavens, the light, the heavens, the sky, the earth, the moon, all the animals, all the creepy crawling things, at the very culmination of the sixth day, we have this phrase, and I mean it's worth pointing out that it says that we are created. Uh, uh, God created um, at ha'adam, and the fact. I mean, I think you can. Well, for those of you who can read Hebrew, recognize Hebrew, it doesn't say created uh, et Adam, it's et ha-Adam. The word ha means the. So God created the man, or I would say the standard understanding is man as in humankind, B'Tselmo, in his image, B'Tselem Elohim bara oto. It's repetitious. Male, in the image of God, he created him, singular, Zecher v'Nekeva, male and female, bara otam, he created them. So we have both a singular description and a plural description. Okay, let's continue.
Here, God creates man in his image. By contrast, in the second, more elaborate story, God says, Chaye Adam
No.
Mimana Adam
Adam haya
Haya
ke'echad mimeno.
Minmana. The man has become like one of us. It is a story of creation, but it deals at greater length with the development of the human species. The focus is not on how humans came about, but on how humans came of age. The story in Adam of Eve is a story of becoming.
Yeah, so and this very much aligns with my own sort of take on this, is that the story of the garden, the story in the garden is about how we progress from an animal state or a childlike state to an adult human state.
The second creation story, which is the focus here, is interested in defining the characteristics of the human condition using a narrative about the exile from the Garden of Eden, the primeval state of bliss and innocence that all humans are forced to leave behind as they grow up, to probe the distance that separates humans from animals on the one hand and from gods on the other. Animals and gods used to be our closest companions and are, in some respects, very close to the human species, yet essentially dissimilar. But outside the garden, that spell is broken.
Now, this is getting back to the idea which I talk about a lot, is, before they eat the fruit, they're naked, they don't know it. And, like children or babies or animals are naked and they don't know it. Alan.
The way just before the last thing Joanne wrote, you had said that how you described this somewhat of an evolutionary process. The way the events of in the Garden of Eden, right? And what I was thinking is that I grew up in a simple past tense. God created the world, and yet we came to appreciate the interpretation of the Hebrew is God began creating the world, right? That in Genesis the wording is not a sudden.
Well, yeah, okay. So of course it's more complicated than that. Um,
Spell.
um, So it says, I mean, the opening line of Genesis is Bereshit bara Elohim. So Bereshit is a grammatical problem because it means in the beginning of, but we don't have the noun to know what it was the beginning of. But in the beginning of something, bara is simple past tense. God created the heavens and the earth. Um, And then there's also interesting questions about was there anything before that moment? Because it says the earth was empty and unvoid and tohu and vohu and and the spirit of God hovered on the face of the deep. So there seems to be some stuff there, but that's an age-old question about whether God created the universe ex nihilo from nothing or formed it from something. I don't know if that's what you're asking about.
Well, I was tying that phrase in Genesis, which I don't now believe it's a past tense, but an ongoing thing.
Okay,
That
let's take a look.
God is creating, and we're participating in creation. That's where I ended up, or end up now. And your
Yeah,
wording supports my thinking. That's all I'm doing. That's all.
oh, yeah. So the question is how can everybody see Safaria?
Yes.
Okay, good. So here the translation is when God began to create. Let's see what their note is. Others in the beginning God created. Um, so again, um, I'm not exactly sure how you would say in Hebrew when God began to create. It might be Bereshit.
Barak.
I don't. No, I know what it says, but I don't know how you would say it. But the word bara is in the past tense. It's not in the present tense. So I absolutely agree with you with the theology that we're partners in creation and we're taking it forward. But basically, this is a story of the beginning. So in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was unvoid and void with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. So there was water. Okay. Anyway, I don't know if that's helpful or more confusing. Um,
I was just tying it to something you said that had an evolutionary context. Something you said about
yeah,
the other
yeah,
verses. I tied.
yes,
It's okay. I'm fine.
yeah. So what I'm talking about here in the Garden of Eden story is, I believe the story is about how we grew from being animals and children to being human and adult. So let's see. I think the story is going to evolve that idea.
Humans and animals. When God decides he wants to take away Adam's solitude by providing him with a fitting companion and
Ezer
a
Kenegdo.
so, okay, a mate that will face him. He first creates the animals. And Hashem God formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and the birds of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that would be its name.
Okay, so
Adam,
he's pointing out here that the all the wild beasts and birds of the sky. Remember, this is the Garden of Eden story. It's in Genesis 2. It's from Min Ha'adamah, from out of the earth. And then let's continue.
Adam and the animals are made from the same substance. They all have been taken out of the earth. Then Hashem God formed man from the dust out of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being.
Interesting.
Adam gives all of the animals their name, but none of them qualifies as a real partner. The man gave names to all cattle and to the birds of the air and to every animal of the field. But for the man there was not found a mate that will face him.
And it's and this idea of Ezer Kenegdo, that's another wonderful Hebrew phrase. Keneged can be, I mean, this is often translated. Well, we can take it if we take a look. Oh, wait. Genesis 2, like 20 or so. So actually, it's just interesting to notice that even before uh, naming all the animals we get this commandment that Vaitsav, the human saying, "Don't eat that fruit." Um, and then we have the God forming everything out of the earth. And again, for you Hebrew speakers, I just want to point out that when God forms the beasts and the birds, the Hebrew is vayitzer, and I just wanted you to notice that there's only one yud there. Okay, I'm clearly pointing this out for a reason. Um, and oh, and yeah. So God says, "I'm going to make a fitting counterpart." So there's lots of ways to translate this word Ezer Kenegdo. I actually named my thesis Ezer Kenegdo toward a theology of Jewish-Christian partnership. The word Ezer means help, and sometimes it might be demeaning to think that the woman would just be a helper, but God is described as an Ezer, so that can't be a helper. But the most interesting word is Keneged. And Keneged can mean, the root meaning of Keneged, as I understand it, is in opposition, like the scales of justice. So this article is translating it as a mate that would face him, because in opposition can mean across the street. If you were actually in modern Hebrew, if you were saying, the street across the street is something, you would say Keneged or neged. So that word can mean a lot of things. But basically, the as we said before, he sees the animals, but for the man, there was not found a mate that would face him. He didn't find a helper. So from one of Adam's ribs, or, we talked about whether it can mean his side or whether it can mean actually his os penis, his penis bone, the woman was made. So let's continue from one
From
of
one of
Adam's.
Adam's ribs, God then forms a woman. She is the right companion. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken."
By the way, I want to jump back, sorry, to Genesis, where it says where God. So here, no, it's not there. I don't know where it is. Vayitzer. Okay, I'll find it later about that double yud. Maybe if that was okay, I'll have to find that later. Okay, let's continue with the story. I don't want to get too off track.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, but
That's why we keep trying to get together, men and women, to become one flesh again. The next article that we may read after this one is about etiology, which is the study of the origins of things. Why are snakes so creepy, and why do they just slide on the ground? Well, because of this story. Paul.
Yes, I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into this because I'd like to know where some of these things that I'll describe came from, or ask a question about these things. Plumeria, rotifers, single-celled organisms, fleas, and mosquitoes. Did God create all those things
Yes.
also? He must have. If he
Well,
created
according
the
to this
animals,
text,
and these things are all over the animals,
yes.
the animals get infected with all these things.
Yes, according to this text, God created everything, mosquitoes, viruses. Um, yeah.
So he was pretty magnificent when he created. I mean, that to me is like all encompassing of everything that's here now. That's what
Um,
I'm thinking. Everything was created. It means all these little things, organisms that live on our skin were created also.
yeah. So I would say it's awesome.
Yes.
I'm not sure the bubonic plague was a great idea,
Yeah.
and dysentery, and
Yes.
and COVID virus, and all
Yes.
these
Yes.
other things. But okay, I respect your opinion. Okay. So yeah, so we're down here, but the first pair is proximity.
But the first pair's proximity to the animals is still very close. They all speak the same language. Adam calls the animals by their name, and Eve converses with the serpent. He, the serpent, said to the woman, Did God say, "You shall not eat from any tree in the garden"? The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden." There is no need for an interpreter, for they have an intuitive understanding of each other. Like animals, the first humans live without cover of clothes and are unaware of their nakedness.
So what this I mean, getting back to your original question, Jim, did they know what death was? Well, who taught either the serpent to speak Hebrew or the man to speak serpent? Um, the text doesn't. The text could have said, the serpent spoke and God understood. I'm sorry, Adam understood what he was saying, but apparently there's no issue between the serpent speaking. And I can't remember now if it's in this article, but this is describing sort of a pristine time when humans and animals got together and they related to each other and they could understand each other. And it's a garden. I mean, I think it's in the next article that they point out that if you read the text carefully, outside, in Genesis 2, this whole area that is created is described as a field, a sade. But the Eden is described as a garden. And gardens were not common in ancient times. A king might have a garden. I mean, people might have orchards and things, but a garden was not common at all. So one of the authors, I don't think it's this article, I think it's going to be the next one, sort of describes this as sort of as an imaginary, well, paradise where animals and people get along. Um, Nobody's eating anybody else. We're just eating fruit, presumably. So it's sort of a naive, wonderful time, Alan.
So I'm maybe thinking ahead by asking this question about modesty. So
Oh,
when
you're only asking one line ahead. So Joanne, why don't you read the next line? And the man,
And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. They
okay.
partake of the same.
No, hold on a second. Oh, you can read that line, yeah, because we were talking about it.
All right.
Sorry.
They partake of the same food as the animals, a strictly vegetarian diet.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
so what's going through my mind is the way you've articulated this is this concept in I'm going to say it in orthodoxy about modesty that men can't touch women and there's certain things that you can't do and some of which I could say I can relate to, but many things I don't. And the source of modesty comes from this part or a little later that it comes.
Well, once they eat of the fruit, they're going to realize they were naked. And God says, "Who told you you were naked?" The fruit that I told you not to eat of. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways in which we are modest. We're modest when we eliminate wastes, right? We
I think I'm thinking more about sexual
No,
modesty.
I understand, but I'm pointing out it's not only sexual modesty.
Okay.
There's all kinds of modesty, and it's not even necessarily sexual modesty. It's modesty of nakedness. So men being in front of men naked is also a source of modesty. And I would say many fundamental religions or fundamentalist versions of religions have an excess of focus on modesty and clothing modesty. But I've not, but I am unfamiliar with any religion that is so focused on clothing modesty that they don't want to have their animals naked. For me, the underlying point here is animals, and I would say by extension, babies, have no issue with being naked. And clearly, with babies, it's not sexual. But nakedness is not an issue for animals or babies, but it is an issue for adult humans. And I would say this is a story about how that comes to be.
Thank you.
Okay. And
And
we're down. Thank
And
you.
Hashem commanded the man, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden." The first human beings are gatherers rather than hunters, for hunting would mean they treated some animals as prey rather than as companions.
I think it's a point that's, just worth thinking about that in this garden, nobody is predator and nobody is prey. You might feel sorry for the poor fruit on the fruit trees, but they don't seem to mind being eaten. Although I don't know how to speak fruit tree any more than I know how to speak serpent. Um, okay.
Humans transition to adulthood, but events take a dramatic turn once Adam and Eve have eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, for the serpent tells Eve, "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad."
Okay. So I just want to point out, as I did before, where it says divine beings, it says Hayitem, you will be like Elohim. And Elohim you can read as divine beings, small d, small b, or you can read God. I mean, God is well right over here. It says ki yodea Elohim. It's the same word for God knows, and it's exactly the same word. So you certainly could read this as saying you will be like God, knowing who knows good and bad.
But what does it mean to have eaten from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and bad? The first effect on Adam and Eve is the opening of their eyes. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked, and they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths.
And that's why the rabbis speculate that the fruit was a fig rather than an apple. We talked about in the earlier presentation how, St. Jerome in the translation into Latin calls the fruit an apple because of the assonance between the word for apple and the word for evil in Latin, malum and malus. Okay, down here with the momentous
The
change.
momentous change that covers over them then is
Comes over them, but okay.
I'm sorry, comes over them,
Mhm.
then is self-awareness, and its first manifestation is shame. They cover themselves not as a protection against the climate, but to hide their nakedness. This sets them apart from the animals who have nothing but their skin for cover.
So,
In the
just
par
important to point out that the reason for clothing is not to protect them from the elements. They seem to be fine with the elements. It's shame. It's to hide their nakedness.
in the parlance of the Bible, not knowing good from bad is the mark of young children.
And these are
And
some of the examples of that.
And as for your little ones, who you thought would become plunder, your children who today do not yet know good from bad, they shall enter there. To them I will give it, and they shall take possession of it.
And this is
This-
at the beginning of Deuteronomy, where Moses, again, it's in Deuteronomy, it's 40 years after the Exodus. The Israelites are about to enter the land, and Moses is explaining why it's only the next generation that's going to enter the land, because this is what God says. But it is a euphemism who not knowing good and bad for children.
This refers to the ignorance of infants and toddlers, to which some men and women return when they reach old age.
This is
I am
interesting. This is from the book of Samuel, and it's about an elderly, I think a king or a fighter. I think I can't remember. I actually checked it.
I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between good and bad? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still listen to the singing of men and women? Why then should your servant continue to be a burden to my lord the king?
Okay, I was actually not familiar with this use of, again, same phrase, tov lara. Okay.
The knowledge which the fruit of the tree procures is not the revelation of a cosmic secret, but the self-awareness and understanding that come with the transition from infancy and childhood to adolescence and adulthood.
Yeah, so we often think because of the name of the tree, knowledge of tov v'ra, good and evil, that it really is a focus on good and evil. But as I explained when we went through this a couple of weeks ago, it's a merism. It means like soup to nuts. It's a knowledge of everything, not just simply good on one hand and evil on the other.
Separation from the animals. The effects of this transition on the human's relationship with the animals comes to the foremost explicitly in God's curse against the serpent. He says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. They will bruise your head, and you will bruise their heel.
To see what the footnote is. Oh, that's his translation. Okay.
From conversation partners, the woman and the snake have become enemies. Their offspring will do each other mutual harm, which affects more deadly for the snake than for the woman's offspring.
Now, remember, just a few verses ago, they were chatting amiably, and now they are enemies.
The distinct points of attack mentioned in the curse have a significant bearing upon the understanding of the passage. If humans bruise the head of snakes and snakes bite humans in the heel, it means that snakes move level with the ground. They crawl on their belly, whereas humans move around in an erect position on two legs rather than crawling on all fours. Snake and women are representatives, the one of the animal and the other of the human species. The chasm that comes to separate them is tangible in their different mode of locomotion. Another,
So he's going to go on, but what the author is arguing here is the consequences of eating the fruit is to affect uh, with an E to create a distinct difference between humans and animals. Before we were partners, and now we're going to be very different. And here's another indication.
Another indication of the new divide between humans and animals is the fact that God replaces the coverings of fig leaves that Adam and Eve had made for themselves with garments of skins. And Hashem made garments of skins for the man and for his wife and clothed them. Animals are no longer companions, but commodities. They become items on the menu and providers of useful raw materials such as wool and hide.
You must admit, I never noticed this before. That when God makes garments of skins, Basu Hashem Elohim la'adam ve'ishto katonot, or uh, v'yalvishem. Katonot actually is the same as the coat that Joseph wears, and or his skin. So basically, God now is using the animals to make skins. They're getting animal skins to clothe themselves. Apparently, fig leaves weren't good enough, so the animals now have become. I think it's a nice observation, a commodity, and eventually they're going to be on the menu. Although it's only after Noah that the strict vegetarianism disappears. So in the garden originally, the animals and the humans just nobody's a predator, nobody is prey. But now we're getting skins of animals, and presumably the snake is snipping at humans' heels, and the woman and humans are stomping on the snake. Okay, so I think I'm gonna. You have this article. I'm not going to go through the entire story of Gilgamesh. It goes on for several pages here. But one of the things I am going to do is jump to kind of toward the end. And there's a lot of similarities about humans being naked and crouching rather than walking. Um, and I'll just read. The myth condenses the gradual evolution from infant to an adult in an instantaneous transformation triggered by sexual initiation in the Gilgamesh story, or eating from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Yeah, let's continue here. Is it possible?
Is it possible that eating from the tree has to do with sex? Is it a metaphor of sexual initiation? Nothing in the story says so explicitly, but the sudden sense of shame shows that Adam and Eve have at least become aware of their gender difference. They have discovered each other as potential sexual partners. Indeed, the Midrash also sees a sexual connotation in the story.
And the note about Genesis 4:1 is when they have their first child. Okay, so now we're reading from Midrash, Genesis Rabbah, the great Midrash about Genesis.
The serpent was cunning. The verse after this one should have said only, the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korah said, it is to inform you what misdeed prompted that evil one, the serpent, to assail them. It is because it saw them engaging in the way of nature, i.e., intercourse, and it lusted for her.
Some wonderful, imaginative, and outrageous. I should read it if only to be able to watch Jim's expression when I read it. Stories about sexual attraction of the serpent for Eve and in Jewish mythology. But I'm not going to go there. Let's see. Okay, this is a translation from Sepharia, and then it says the serpent was cutting. Arum is the Hebrew word for cutting, and arumim means naked. So it's there's puns going on in the Hebrew that you completely miss in any translation. Paul, I'll just say for your benefit, there's a lot going on there, which is in the Hebrew. Okay, let's continue.
In the minds of the authors of these stories, the discovery of sex is a crucial point of transition in the lives of human beings. It opens the door to adulthood. This is sex as initiation, not as procreation. There is no childbirth in the Garden of Eden, and
Ooh.
Shahat is a prostitute, not a wife.
Again, that's a reference to the Gilgamesh story,
Wow.
because we don't have procreation until they're out of the garden. After they're expelled from the garden, then we have um, we have the story of Cain and Abel's birth. Okay, let's read a little more. I think we can
Human and
finish this story.
gods. Human and gods. The other dimension of the Garden of Eden story concerns the relation between humans and gods. The serpent entices the woman to eat from the fruit by saying that she and her man will become like divine beings, i.e., gods. For God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad. It is the truth. Their eyes are opened, and they do become like gods in some sense, as is clear from the conclusion of the story.
And who says they become like God? God says. So let's read this verse.
And Hashem said, now that the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad, what if he should stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever?
So God basically confirms exactly what the serpent says. Serpent says you won't die, and they don't, but you will become like gods, knowing good from bad. And God says exactly that once they eat. Um, and God's worried about them living forever, eating from the tree of life.
Wow.
The motif of likeness to gods also occurs in the Enkidu episode. In the eyes of the prostitute, Enkidu's transformation has made him look like a god. You are handsome, Enkidu. You are just like a god. To Shamhat, the handsomeness of Enkidu resides more especially in his stature. He is tall in stature. Enkidu has let go of his animal ways and moves about erect, head held high, and 2 feet on the ground.
Okay, Jim.
Uh, the, oh, sure. I'm sorry. I forgot what I was going to ask.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
you will remember, I have no doubt. Let's continue.
The Genesis story hints a similar transformation by contrasting the shuffling of the serpent with the upright posture of humans. It is Homo erectus who is like gods. But although human beings might be like gods, their mortality puts them definitely outside the pale of divinity. The sanction on eating the prohibited fruit is death. God had forewarned Adam. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall die.
Just take a quick glance. Yeah.
Where's your
Okay.
head?
Okay.
The ingestion of
Hold
the
on, hold
fruit.
on, hold on, hold on. Jim.
Yeah. Why is it that God didn't tell him to not eat of the tree of life,
Right.
but apparently that was the one that he was really worried about them eating because he kept them out of the garden so that they wouldn't eat that one.
Hmm.
So, well, A, they ate from the wrong tree, but
Right.
why why didn't God say, don't eat from the tree of life?
Yes, so I often wonder about that, and I don't know if it's in this article or in the next one that it makes a reference to the fact that before they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they were not really yet human, and theoretically they might live forever anyway. But it's now only after they have become human that they are destined to die, and then it becomes an issue. I think that's what the article said. But I must admit that always puzzled me also. But but heck, there's a lot of trees there. So many trees, so little time. Um, but it's a very good question. I agree with you. Okay, the ingestion.
The ingestion of the fruit does not cause sudden death. In fact, as long as man and women are still in the garden, the tree of life is within reach, its fruit a source of eternal rejuvenation. To prevent the humans from eating that fruit, however, God banishes them from the garden, where he has told them that death will become the grim destiny of every human being. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return.
Let me just take a quick look at the footnotes. Yeah, that was the Gilgamesh. Oh, and there's other articles. So what's happening here is now that I'm looking at these footnotes, I'm looking up these articles, and I'm very tempted to inflict them on you. And so anyway, let's
For
just
Enkidu, too, death proves to be part of the package. Faced with his own mortality, he curses the hunter and the prostitute for introducing him to civilized life and making him weak. But for him, the era of innocence and animal instincts is forever gone. Just so for Adam and Eve and the rest of us, there is no return to paradise. Cherubim with flaming swords guard its entry. No one is allowed back in, lest they eat from the tree of life and become immortal.
we're almost at the end, I think.
Wisdom garbed as myth. So, what kind of story is this tale about the Garden of Eden? A theological meditation on sin and sanction? An ancient Middle Eastern myth on the origins of the human species? A fairy tale with a bad ending? In view of the easy interaction between humans, animals, and God, the text moves in a mythological mood. The astonishing parallels with the Enkidu narrative point to the same conclusion. But in the end, this is wisdom in the garb of myth. In the scribal culture of Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh was classified as wisdom literature. Such an Assyrian catalog of texts and authors listed alongside other well-known sapiential texts. Likewise, the Garden of Eden story is Israelite wisdom, the wisdom of people who understand that human life is full of pain and hardship, but also of great beauty and moments of dazzling happiness.
Yes.
In order to experience it to the full, we had to leave the garden, but it is like growing up. At some point, you realize that infancy and childhood are behind you. The magical world of youthful innocence has vanished. But who wants to go back? Except for a fleeting moment of nostalgia, we know that nothing matches the life of sorrow and joy in the real world. Even though it must end, or precisely because of that, it is worth living to the full.
Just take a quick glance at the footnote. Okay, another article.
As the tavern keeper whom Gilgamesh meets near the end of his journey tells him, death is our destiny. But in the meantime, there is much to be enjoyed, especially the companionship of a partner and the sweetness of children holding your hand. Ecclesiastes couldn't agree more. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that are given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at what you toil under the sun.
By the way, this is the bottom line, uh, as much as you can find one in Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes. And Rabbi Harold Kushner has written, a wonderful book. Try to glance with the title, which is a commentary on Ecclesiastes. And basically, he says, enjoy your life while you have a life to enjoy. Um, And I like that. Uh, and I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, this was great. We finished this article, so I don't feel bad about inflicting another one on you on next Monday. We will not meet on Wednesday because of lots of folks, including me, traveling. But any other thoughts before I wish you a happy Thanksgiving?
Thank you. And I got a question.
Sure.
Uh, these rabbis that you refer to them, in those, is any woman rabbi or all of them are men?
I don't know. I don't know who you're talking about when you say the rabbis that I refer to.
Yeah, the rabbis that their name is in Talmud or
Oh, okay. So all the rabbis of the Talmud are men.
but these days I
This
saw
what?
that many rabbis they wrote the book, but I don't know even one woman rabbi writes the book about the Torah.
Oh, yeah. So I would say, the Reform movement has been ordaining rabbis for probably 50 years or so. I think we just hit the anniversary of 50th year of Sally Priestland being ordained by the Reform movement as first rabbi. Pretty shortly thereafter, the conservative movement ordained rabbis. There are women that are discussed in the Talmud, but they're not described as rabbis, but they are women of wisdom. But when we talk about the rabbis of the Talmud in the Talmudic period, we're always talking about women, always talking about men.
Okay, thank
Right.
you.
Yes, yes. Alan.
I would just wanted to reinforce it, which I would describe to you, Farah, is that your name? Voices, not necessarily rabbis, but if you listen to what I believe is six is the prominent women voices in the Talmud, they have as you said, Rabbi, they represent wisdom that's comparable to the men rabbis in their teaching.
So there are women in the Talmud. I even have a book by Judith Abrams of blessed memory called Women in the Talmud, and there are a few, but there are hundreds and hundreds of men. So and so as Judith would say, our tradition, our particular ancient tradition, is misogynistic. It's male centered. Pound the table, get angry, and then let go of it and then let's study. But there is no question that we come, as I would say, all the religions, or certainly the religions of Abraham, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam come from a male-centered culture. Yeah, absolutely. But there are some examples of the women in the Talmud getting it and the men not getting it in terms of important insights. So yeah, I think that is important to mention. Okay, there was a line that was said last night in our interfaith Thanksgiving service by it was the pastor from the Church of Christ. Uh, yeah, the Conejo Valley Church of Christ, Andy Wall.
Andy Wall, yeah.
Yeah. And he had a beautiful, simple line, which I will commit to memory. And he said he saw it on a bumper sticker, which means it must be truly wise. And the line was, "Those who are grateful are happy. Those who aren't. I love that. So I think the secret of happiness is gratitude, and we have an entire day devoted to it. And of course, football and overeating, all the things that are truly important in life. And so I wish you all a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I wish you many things in your life for which you are justifiably thankful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you for saying thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Thank you so
next
much.
week, next Monday, we will meet again, and we'll still be stuck in the Garden of Eden with
Okay.
another article called Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, an etiology for the human condition, which actually is quite good. So thank you all, and see you next time.
Good night.
Good
Happy
night.
Thanksgiving,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.